I'm sitting by the dining table, listening to the clock ticking. The dining table is spotless, without a single mark from utensils. James Wilson returned home, changing his shoes at the entrance, his suit still faintly carrying the scent of a woman's perfume. I don't need to sniff closely to know it's Sophie Miller's favorite jasmine perfume. James came home, finding the table spotless. "Did you eat the cake?" he asked. "Yesterday was our 10th wedding anniversary. I had planned to order a big cake to celebrate. I told him we would have dinner together, and then cut the cake, but he broke his promise. He didn't come home all night, spending it with Sophie for her birthday." "You ate the cake all by yourself. Aren't you afraid of getting fat? You should pay attention to your figure," he joked. Usually, I would angrily throw whatever I have on the ground, questioning him if I need to be as slender as Sophie to get his attention. But this time, I couldn't be bothered to argue, and just replied lightly, "You're right." James frowned slightly, and asked with concern, "Emma, are you feeling unwell?" I shook my head, walked to the refrigerator, and prepared to take out the dish I made yesterday. "Did you make this?" James walked over, glanced at it, and frowned, saying, "It has no color, aroma, or flavor." Actually, yesterday, I not only ordered a cake, but also cooked myself, making his favorite dish. I waited until 10 o'clock at night and called him 3 times, but he didn't answer any of them. It wasn't until I saw Sophie's social media post that I realized he was out. There's nothing much that I care about anymore. He took the cake out of the fridge and found that it hadn't been touched at all, so he cut a piece, wanting to feed me. I turned my head away, just as his phone rang, which interrupted his attempt to force-feed me. "James, I was so happy last night." Sophie's delicate voice came through. James glanced at me and responded without hesitation, "I'm happy too. Someone misses you. Can you go shopping with me?" Seeing that I was busy with something, James said, "Be good, I'll message you later." "I'll wait for your message then." When the call ended, the cake had already started to melt a bit. James's expression darkened, and he bluntly said, "It looks disgusting, don't eat it." I casually packed the cake away. Carrying those dishes, I was about to leave. He suddenly grabbed my arm and asked, "Emma, where are you going?" "To feed the dog." This made James immediately unhappy. "The dishes I made last night, and this cake has only melted a bit, and you're going to feed it to the dog? Can't you eat it? This is how you waste my money." "That's right, I'm usually very frugal, and I never easily waste food. All the leftover food is eaten by me, and I only have a few dresses, which I wear repeatedly." He's already used to this. Seeing me walk out without looking back, James chased after me. "You get angry over just a few words. Why do you have such a bad temper?" I waited for the elevator expressionlessly, and seeing that I was ignoring him, his anger intensified. "Emma, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary yesterday. Who are you giving a cold shoulder to today?" I sighed. Usually I would argue with him, but now I feel it's unnecessary. He also seems caught off guard, and the air instantly became silent. Beep, the elevator has arrived. I was about to step in, but James got in ahead of me. He angrily pressed the button for the first floor, and coldly said, "Take the next one." After saying that, he mercilessly pressed the door close button. I was holding heavy items in both hands, and soon my shoulders began to ache. On our 10th anniversary, he left me alone, while he celebrated another woman's birthday. For many years, I have been guarding this home, not wanting it to fall apart. I really don't understand what James is still dissatisfied with. Perhaps, only those who are not loved will be treated this way. The elevator has been stuck on the first floor, and hasn't come up. I'm worried that the cream in the bag will melt, so I'm trying to carry it as carefully as I can. The cake is specially customized, with 10 years together written in chocolate on top. Unfortunately, this heartfelt gesture ended up being a joke. I waited for a long time until my arms went numb, before I finally saw the elevator slowly coming up. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw James casually standing at the elevator entrance. He noticed my fingers were turning white, and then walked over to take the things from my hands. "Are we going to the old place to feed again?" he asked. I nodded, and softly replied, "Yeah." He then said, "I'll take you there." We walked to the car, and I was about to open the passenger door. He hurriedly stopped me. I said I would go pick up Sophie later, afraid she would be unhappy if she saw someone sitting in her seat, so I sat in the back. I didn't want to cause any more trouble, so I simply sat in the back seat. Looking out at the rapidly retreating scenery, I realized that I seemed to be James's wife. But I felt like an outsider, sitting in the back seat of my own dowry car, and I even had a vague feeling of intruding on their marriage. A toy that Sophie liked was hanging in the front passenger seat, which had already become her exclusive seat. I couldn't help but laugh. "What are you laughing at?" James frowned, intentionally driving bumpy, as if he wanted to make me uncomfortable. He said Sophie is still a little girl, and it's normal for her to like these things. My smile instantly disappeared. James probably forgot that I used to be a little girl too. I also like those cute things. But he always says, "What's the point of buying these things? They're a waste of money and take up space," and he definitely won't allow me to put dolls in the car. Seeing me silent, he asked again, "Are you going crazy?" It turns out that in his eyes, my arguments are just madness. He was taken aback for a moment. Just as he was about to say something, the phone rang again. As soon as he saw the incoming call, he abruptly turned the steering wheel, pulling the car over to the side of the road. He stopped too suddenly, and I didn't have time to react, before crashing into the passenger seat's backrest. A sharp pain hit me instantly, and blood started to flow from my nose. He casually threw the stuff from the trunk by the roadside, opened the car door and pulled me out, completely unconcerned about my injuries. "Sophie's finger was cut. I wanted to go see her. Just walk over by yourself." I covered my nose. Blood was flowing out between my fingers, dripping onto my white clothes, making it particularly eye-catching. But all he could see was Sophie, completely oblivious to my continuous bleeding. James drove away, leaving me in a suburban area with almost no traffic. As soon as he left, it started pouring rain from the sky. I couldn't find a place to shelter from the rain, and could only get soaked like a drowned rat. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Being left on the road is considered merciful. Last week, he suddenly wanted to take me swimming, even forgetting that I was afraid of water, and directly took me to the deep end of the pool. Halfway through learning, his waterproof watch went off. It was a call from Sophie. He completely forgot that I couldn't swim, and without hesitation, he let go of my hand, leaving me to get to the shore on my own. I struggled in the pool for a long time, and I almost drowned. Later, I realized that Sophie wanted James to teach her how to swim, and James was worried he wouldn't teach her well, so he used me to practice. Fortunately, someone eventually saved me. I coughed as if my lungs were about to burst. My face was pale, and my heart was filled with fear. When I turned my head, James was in the corner, laughing and chatting with Sophie on the phone, completely unaware of me, as if I didn't exist at all. At that moment, the cold rain was hitting me. It was truly bone-chilling. The blood on my body was diluted by the rain, making it look particularly frightening. The 10th anniversary cake was soaked in water, turning into a clump of gray mud, just like my 10-year marriage with James. I was shivering from the cold, took out my phone from my bag, and decisively called my lawyer. "Daniel, is my divorce agreement ready?" In the end, I took a full hour to catch a taxi home, and then developed a high fever that night. I touched my forehead, and it felt really hot. My heart was racing, and my throat was as dry as sand. I wanted James to take me to the hospital, but then I remembered he hadn't come home, and was with Sophie instead. There was no choice. I had to brace myself and grab my phone, to go to the hospital by myself. The doctor told me, after a miscarriage, I shouldn't catch a chill, or it could lead to lingering health issues. I gently stroked my belly, feeling a pang of sorrow inside. James and I have been married for 10 years, and I finally got pregnant with this child, only to have it taken away by his own hands. Last month I kept feeling unwell, thinking it was just a stomach issue. But when James found out, he seemed very happy. He suggested I help Sophie try the medicine. It's a new drug. Sophie is physically weak, and I happen to have a stomachache, so he asked me to try the medicine. He said it was for my own good, and if I felt he was trying to harm me, then we could just get a divorce. I wanted to explain, but he interrupted me, insisting that I try the medicine, and even directly shoved the pills into my mouth. Unexpectedly, the medicine he gave me turned out to be untested. When he saw I had no reaction, he felt relieved and took the medicine to find Sophie. As soon as he left, I experienced severe abdominal pain, and could only helplessly call for an ambulance. After arriving at the hospital, the doctor told me I had miscarried and needed to rest properly. After getting off the operating table, I called James a dozen times, but he didn't answer any of them. Half an hour later, he finally returned my call. But you blame me for not even trying the medicine properly, which caused Sophie's stomach pain. Sophie posted an update on her social media with a picture of her and James wearing couple rings. The caption said someone compensated me by buying me a couple ring, and it looks so beautiful. That night, James stormed home in anger, grabbing my collar and pulling me close. Emma, how could you be so malicious? You clearly knew that medicine was harmful. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Do you know how much pain Sophie is in? If you're going to be so petty, then let's get a divorce. I disregarded my weak body after the miscarriage, stumbling to kneel and beg for his forgiveness. Please don't divorce me. He kicked me away, not looking back as he left to find Sophie. If anything happens to Sophie, I will never let you go. I cried the entire night. In the end, only numbness remains. I bitterly smiled and said to the doctor, this won't happen again. The day after the anniversary, I went to the hospital for a follow-up and unexpectedly ran into James. Sophie, who was beside him, once lively now seemed pale and weak, timidly holding onto James's arm. Emma, what are you doing at the hospital? Are you here for a gynecological checkup? You didn't catch some embarrassing disease, did you? Sophie's words were full of sarcasm, but James didn't defend me at all. I've long been accustomed to this silence. Emma, James is just too worried about me. I only said I was fine, and that's why he insisted on bringing me to the hospital. Please don't be angry over such a small matter. I explained. I'm not angry, I replied lightly. James sneered coldly. Emma, what are you pretending for in front of me? Haven't you hit Sophie enough times? His words are merciless. I have never hit Sophie, and I don't understand what she said to James. I took a deep breath, deciding not to argue with them. Just as I was about to grab the medicine bag and leave, James suddenly grabbed my arm. What kind of attitude is that? Did you not hear me talking to you? Are you deaf? She is hurt, so just stay with her. I forcefully pried his hand away and turned to leave. He said behind me, since you don't care, then let's get a divorce. As soon as I heard those two words, my steps immediately halted. He stared at me triumphantly, with a mocking smile on his lips. You panic at the mention of divorce. It seems you'd better behave. I took out the medical record and the divorce agreement from my bag. He suddenly slammed it into his face. You really will stop at nothing, just to get my attention. James nonchalantly took the agreement, smirking coldly. He flipped through it, his brows gradually knitting tighter. Until he saw my signature, his anger erupted instantly. He thought I was just threatening him, but he didn't expect I actually wanted a divorce. As long as he signs at the back, this agreement will take effect. Sophie's face was full of joy, her cheeks flushed red. James, aren't you going to sign? However, James ripped the divorce agreement in half, throwing it at me. Emma, do you think you can just get married if you want, and get divorced whenever you like? Don't dream. This family is not just up to you. After saying that, he grabbed Sophie's wrist, getting ready to leave. Brother James, this. Sophie reluctantly looked back, her gaze falling on the divorce agreement on the ground. I know she has been looking forward to this moment, her heart simply wanting to facilitate my divorce from James. Unfortunately, James did not sign it as she wished, gladly putting his signature down. I squatted down, picked up the divorce agreement from the ground, let out a silent sigh, and put it back in my bag. Even if the agreement gets torn, it doesn't matter, since I can always print a second or third copy. As long as I want to divorce James, it will only appear more and more often. After returning home, I packed all my luggage, leaving not a single hair behind. From today on, I have decided to separate from James. Even if he is unwilling to sign the divorce agreement, separation can still show the court my determination to divorce. In fact, back then, it was he who actively pursued me, and it was also he who proposed to me. On the day of the proposal, on a yacht where the sea meets the sky, he knelt down on one knee, and amidst the cheers of the crowd, he said loudly, Emma, marry me. I will take care of you for a lifetime. After he took out the engagement ring, he sincerely swore to the sky, I, James Wilson, will only love Emma in this lifetime. If I ever regret it, may lightning strike me. Once upon a time, he also made such a promise, claiming he would take care of me for a lifetime. However, he was able to abandon me without a care. I took off the wedding ring and placed it on the table. That lonely ring stood out starkly against the brown table. James will definitely see it when he comes back. Even if he doesn't see it, it doesn't matter, because I no longer need it. No matter who James is, still, as James's wife, it all means nothing to me. I pulled my luggage, walking to the door, and took a glance back at our former love nest, which holds 10 years of our memories. In that moment of closing the door, I felt I had finally gained my freedom. Leaving this place, saying goodbye to the marriage that bound me, and distancing myself from him, who treated me poorly. However, when I turned around, I saw James standing in front of me, his expression difficult to read. I said to him, "I'm leaving. The divorce agreement will be sent to your email. Take a good look at it." He did not respond, just quietly stared at me. "If you're afraid I might suddenly come back, then just delete my fingerprints." After I finished speaking, I took my suitcase and walked towards the elevator. Not long after, the suitcase suddenly wouldn't move. I looked down, and James was holding onto the suitcase handle. "Emma, you really have guts to think about running away from home? Do you see me, your husband, as so unimportant?" His words left me feeling helpless. Over the years, he often came home late at night and never really cared about me as his wife. How can he have the face to say such things? "James, I'm not running away, but I no longer want you. I've decided to return to my small house before marriage, which I bought while struggling in the city. It's my premarital property, and no one can take it away." He once wanted me to sell this house. Thankfully, I didn't listen to him. I need to leave myself an escape route. After moving out of the big house, I tidied up the small house again. The sun was setting, and the afterglow spilled into the living room through the balcony. Lying on the sofa, the warm light makes me feel like I've returned to 10 years ago. Back then, I wasn't married, and I completely belonged to myself. I found a new job, fully immersed in my work life. Although my marriage with James hasn't completely ended, my spirit has already gained its freedom. Like a bird flying freely in the sky, no longer a kite pulled by James' string, struggling desperately in the air to avoid falling. When my work started to stabilize, and I checked my emails, I found that James hadn't even looked at the divorce agreement I sent. I couldn't help but call him. On the other end of the line, I heard Sophie's voice. "Emma, is there something you need to talk to James about?" "Let James take the call," I responded calmly. "James is busy right now. You can tell me what you need." Sophie's voice was still so soft. No wonder James is infatuated with her. "Tell James, please check the divorce agreement in your email as soon as possible, otherwise I will have to go to his company to talk in person." After I finished speaking, I hung up the phone. I know Sophie will definitely inform James about this matter. She might even embellish the story in front of James. It doesn't matter, as long as James can sign the divorce agreement. Moreover, Sophie won't let me meet James. Sure enough, James quickly called me and scolded me. He said the company has been very busy lately and told me not to disturb him. He would contact me proactively if there was anything unclear. James just wants to buy time. What's the point of doing this? I sighed silently, and after he finished his rapid-fire speech, I finally spoke up. "James, you are still like this, speaking harshly and aggressively, never giving me a chance to speak." The other end of the line fell into silence. After a long time, he just spoke up. "Emma, let's have a meal together." Seeing that I remained silent, he added, "It's been a long time since we had a meal together." I replied, "James, I can't find a reason to eat with you now. Once you sign the papers, we can have a farewell meal together. Consider it a good parting. I don't want the ending to be too ugly. This 10-year marriage really should come to an end. I used to be very painful. I loved James, always on edge. Whenever he mentioned divorce, I would tremble all over, terribly scared. Now, divorce has become my only way out. I understand, once I divorce, I can escape this gloomy life. I will feel joyful, and life will become happy again." On the other end of the phone, James asked, "Emma, how long are you going to keep this up? Let's go out for a meal and have a good talk, okay?" He rarely lowered his proud head. He has never taken the initiative to make amends, and every time I had to compromise, to beg him to reconcile. After all these years of torment, I'm really tired, both physically and mentally. I said to him, James, in the past when I wanted to have a good talk with you, you always rejected me. Now that you want to talk, why should I agree? James was choked by my words. I hung up the phone directly, not wanting to argue with him anymore. Another 10 days passed, and James still hadn't checked my email. So, I decided to go to the company to find him. Since the relationship is already torn apart, there's nothing left to care about. Seeing that I really came to the company, Sophie's eyes flashed with surprise. Perhaps she didn't expect that James agreed to look at the divorce agreement, but still hasn't acted on it until now. Yet she is still unwilling to accept it, and insists on coming to ask for the truth herself. Emma, what brings you here? She smiled sweetly. The wind of divorce. I replied lightly. James isn't in the office. Oh dear, you should have called me in advance. She clearly doesn't want me to see James. But I've been married to James for 10 years, whether he's in the office or not, I don't need her to tell me. I walked straight to James's office. Sophie hurried over to stop me. Emma, I told you James isn't here. Perhaps James heard my voice inside. Before I could knock, the door opened. I glanced at the awkward Sophie. Didn't you say he wasn't in the office? Is the one opening the door a ghost? Sophie turned red and pale from my remark. I'm just afraid of disturbing James. She lowered her head pitifully, as if I were bullying her, hiding behind James. Emma, you're so fierce, but I didn't do anything wrong. She looked so pitiful, as if she could only play innocent in front of men, and besides this trick, she had no other skills. Why not ask James to give you an Oscar for Best Actress? I said unceremoniously. Sophie looked at me in shock, stunned and unable to speak for a long time. Then, she tugged at James's shirt and said pitifully, James, look, Emma is bullying me again. I don't even know what I did wrong. James frowned. I thought he would scold me, but unexpectedly, he said to Sophie, what happens between us as a couple really doesn't need your interference. Sophie's face instantly turned pale. She bit her lower lip, glared at me with resentment, and ran out crying. Of course, I wouldn't let James chase after her. After all, I had set aside work for this meeting, which was not easy to arrange. And James also seemed to have no intention of chasing her. He poured me a cup of tea, and sat back on the sofa, crossing his legs. I got straight to the point. Since you don't check your emails, I've brought the divorce agreement directly. After saying that, I took the documents out of my bag, placed them on the table, and pushed them in front of him. There was no pen on the table. He leisurely picked up his teacup, not even glancing at it, mumbling something incoherently. In the next moment, I slammed the pen down on the divorce agreement, urging, sign it. Seeing my determination to get a divorce, a hint of panic flashed in James's eyes. He put down his teacup and asked discontentedly, Emma, are you really in such a hurry to divorce me? I nodded and replied, yes, I really want a divorce. I've even dreamed of you signing it. He gritted his teeth and said, Emma, we've been married for 10 years. 10 years. He wasn't wrong, but that doesn't change my resolve to get a divorce. James threatened, we have no children, and after the divorce, you won't get any alimony. Even if you sue, I will hire the best lawyer to make sure you get nothing. James, I really don't need any of that. I responded with a smile, as long as you're willing to sign the divorce papers. He suddenly slammed the table and yelled at me angrily, Emma, what do you want to stop this once and for all? I stood up gracefully, took out the divorce agreement and said, I've already given you the agreement. I hope you can sign it after reading it without any issues. Even if it goes to court, I will still insist on the divorce. After saying that, I walked out of his office elegantly. At 10 o'clock in the evening, I lay on the sofa, eating chips and watching TV, when I suddenly received a call from a friend. Emma, James is drunk. He's feeling awful right now. I looked up at the wall clock. At this time, it wasn't too late. What does it matter to me if he's drunk? My friend said, oh, it's so late now. No one is sending him home. If no one is sending him, let him stay overnight at your place, or call Sophie to pick him up. I was chewing on chips, while saying, enough said, I'm going to watch TV. Then I hung up the phone. In the past, I never hung up on my friends. But this time, obviously, James was deliberately testing me. He wanted to see if I would soften and go pick him up. Unfortunately, he overestimated my feelings for him. I won't be as warm as before and chase after him. In the past, I always kept an eye on James. not letting him stay out too late, and not allowing him to get completely drunk. It was all for his health. Sure, work is important, but health is fundamental. Whenever I called too much, he would yell at me on the other end. When he was drunk, I would go pick him up, only for him to scold me in front of everyone for not giving him face. At that time, I only thought about bringing him home and taking good care of him, never caring about how others viewed me. Little did I expect that in others' eyes, I not only became someone who lacked manners, but was even called a fierce woman. Later on, James' friends would drunkenly ask me what it was like being a wife, even saying I wasn't worthy of James, and suggested I leave the position of wife to Sophie. I spent whole nights taking care of drunken James, only to not gain a reputation for being virtuous, but instead earned a stigma of being unworthy. Therefore, I will no longer do such thankless tasks. I used to be lost in the fog of love. A phrase that James often said to me was utterly foolish. Now, my heart no longer belongs to him, and I have awakened. I will never do those utterly foolish things again. I will never do those extremely foolish things again. Several days have passed, and James still hasn't contacted me. I called him, but he didn't answer. It seems James is avoiding signing. I dialed Sophie's number, and she didn't care about my attitude either. But as soon as divorce is mentioned, Sophie's tone becomes much gentler. Emma, there's nothing I can do if James doesn't answer your calls, and I can't interfere in your divorce. Isn't that normal? I told her, if you want to be James's legal wife, then I must be his ex-wife, aren't I right? Sophie fell silent, her tone revealing helplessness. I really can't do anything. Am I supposed to hold his hand and make him sign? If James is unwilling to sign, then I can only file for divorce. The lawyer told me, this process will take at least 1.5 years. Can you wait that long? Sophie seemed hesitant about this. You should try to persuade her. Sophie waited for 10 years. I know she doesn't want to drag this on any longer. She longs to be James's legal wife. Otherwise, she wouldn't repeatedly sabotage my relationship with James. Although James is the main culprit in our relationship, I no longer want to blame anyone. I just want to end my marriage with James as soon as possible. However, Sophie seems unable to convince James to sign the divorce agreement. In the end, I had no choice but to call in Daniel Thompson. I went to the company with him to find James. Coincidentally, Daniel was the one who saved me that day at the pool. I only learned his identity afterward, added him on WeChat, but I hadn't really contacted him since. I finally made up my mind to divorce James. The office door was open, and I happened to see Sophie tiptoe, placing a kiss on James's face. I calmly glanced at Daniel, and found that he seemed accustomed to it, watching the scene with composure. James caught a glimpse of me out of the corner of his eye, and immediately pushed Sophie away. Sophie stumbled back, falling heavily to the ground. Emma, don't get me wrong, James was about to explain, but I interrupted him. I won't misunderstand. That's your personal matter. It has nothing to do with me. Daniel adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and calmly said, if the man is cheating while married, then it concerns you. James looked at Daniel, who was dressed in a suit and had a serious expression, slightly furrowed his brow, and asked displeased, who is this man? This is my attorney, Daniel Thompson. I mentioned him to you before. I replied, if you don't sign, next time I'll bring my lawyer to talk to you. James pointed to the door and coldly said, get him out of here. I just want to talk to you alone. I said softly, James, you have no choice. If you don't talk to my lawyer, then we'll have to meet in court. Did that man teach you these words? James slammed the table in anger. In disbelief he asked, are you really forcing me to sign with someone else's man? Daniel coldly replied, Mr. James, please watch your words. My client has the right to have me represent her in conversation with you. Get out! James waved his hand, and all the documents on the table were swept to the floor. I had never seen James so angry. He, who usually remains calm in the face of disaster, seemed less composed today. I'll say it again, you let him out, and then I'll talk to you, James said with anger in his eyes. Daniel slightly lowered his head, whispered a few words, glanced at James, and then walked out. You should go out too, James said to Sophie, who was crying on the floor. The office door closed. I stood still. James sat in the leather chair, his gaze coldly questioning me. Is that really a lawyer? Yeah. His eyes slightly moved, raising an eyebrow and asking, it's not your new lover, is it? I shot him a cold glance. James, do you think I would act like you? I would never cheat during a marriage. Neither would I. He replied lightly, his eyes examining my expression. But I still looked indifferent. James, this is the second time I've come to your office to discuss this. Are you going to sign the divorce agreement or not? He stood up, slowly walking in front of me. Taking a deep breath, he gently held my hand. Emma, let's make up. Stop causing trouble, okay? I suddenly pulled my hand back, wiping it with a handkerchief. His hand touched Sophie, and I felt it was unclean. This action seemed to make him a bit angry, but he quickly calmed down. Emma, I'm serious. Let's just consider this a fight, and make up. I threw the handkerchief into the trash can. James, I no longer have feelings for you. Dragging this out is not good for either of us. It's better to get a divorce, and live our own lives. He was stunned for a moment, frowning and asking, Emma, when you say you have no feelings for me, what do you mean? I sighed, and said slowly, James, I no longer love you. He looked as if he had been struck by lightning, frozen in place. It's been a long time since anyone spoke. The office was filled with silence. I could almost hear his rapid heartbeat. I broke the silence. I don't love you anymore. Let's sign the divorce papers. It's best for everyone to part ways amicably. James's eyes were red. He urgently grabbed my shoulders and explained, Emma, I never cheated on you. I truly have never wronged you. At this moment, what's the point of saying all this? I retorted. We can start over. I will treat you well like before, he said confidently. I scoffed. So you realize you've treated me poorly. He seemed at a loss for words, and said hoarsely, don't you still trust my character? Sophie was my first love. I have always regarded her as a sister, and I have never had a relationship with her. I don't want to hear your explanation. I just want you to sign the divorce papers. Compared to his panic, I seemed particularly calm. James, those nights waiting for you to come home alone, I really can't endure it any longer. I'm tired, so please let me go, and let yourself go too, okay? I sincerely ask him to sign the divorce agreement, hoping he can consider our years of affection. Our marriage has come to this point. Neither of us is at fault, and I won't blame you. I just want us to part ways with dignity, and not let things get too ugly. James smiled. His laughter echoed in the office. Under my sympathetic gaze, his laughter gradually turned into crying. Teardrops fell one by one onto the floor, just like the tears I shed for him during my lonely nights. Emma, you are really heartless. He pointed at me and said, our 10 years of marriage. You just say you want a divorce. I replied. In the past, my emotions were always influenced by him. My joys and sorrows all stemmed from him. Now, he can no longer control my emotions. I am calm, almost like ice, which he finds unbearable. James, I don't want a divorce, he said to me, crying. I shook my head. So we'll just have to meet in court. As I turned to leave, he slowly knelt down behind me. Emma, I've neglected you all these years, and made you suffer. I'm really sorry, he said, choking up. I will never sign the divorce agreement. If you want to go to court, then go. At least for this year, you are still my wife. James has really gone mad. I sighed helplessly. In these 10 years of marriage, what have I actually gained? Aside from a body full of scars, I can't think of anything else. Since there's nothing at all, what's the difference from being single? Before closing the door, I said to James, who was kneeling on the ground, when you talk to your next wife, don't wear a couple's ring from another woman. That's just too disrespectful. So, I will never believe anything James says again. Whether what he says is true or false, since I chose to divorce, I naturally don't care anymore. That night, I received a gift box and couldn't help but wonder who sent it. When I opened it, it scared me to death. I came to my senses, running around the room while screaming. This crazy James actually chopped off his finger wearing the couple ring with Sophie. Blood everywhere. It's both disgusting and horrifying. I trembled as I called Daniel, and he arrived quickly. He helped me tend to my injured finger, then walked over to hold me tightly as I shivered in the corner, crouching down to embrace me. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm here. No one can hurt you. I looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, my lips trembling as I clutched his shirt. He really looked terrifying. Daniel sighed. You could tell he still loved me. He just couldn't accept that I wanted a divorce. He thought this extreme method would move me and bring me back to his side. However, the effect was counterproductive, and I became even more afraid of him. My mind was filled with that bloodied finger, and any feelings of love I simply couldn't absorb. My hands and feet were cold, and I didn't even have the strength to stand up. Daniel helped me to my room and poured me a glass of warm water to drink. In this situation, you can call the police and let the station help you file a report. He suggested, of course, if you think it's not a big deal, then just drop the matter. I nodded. Let's file a report. Let's file a report. Daniel's expression seemed somewhat complex. Your love is no longer there, but his love quietly emerged. In the end, you are destined to be fated yet unconnected, and can only become half-married. 1 year later, I won the lawsuit. I won the divorce case, thanks to Daniel's efforts. That day when I walked out of the courthouse, James stopped me. He had already reattached the fingers he lost. Emma, congratulations, you are no longer James Wilson's wife. He said that. I responded with a smile. If you had been willing to sign a year ago, perhaps I wouldn't have been anymore. There was a hint of sadness in James's eyes. He looked at me for a while, then his gaze turned to Daniel. You're impressive, there's no denying it. You are an outstanding lawyer. Daniel humbly replied, thank you for the compliment, Mr. James, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to pursue Emma openly. Since then, I have not seen James again. I heard he has been refusing to marry Sophie. Sophie is still waiting for his commitment. In the end, she chose to marry another man. There are no other women around James. On the day Daniel and I got married, I received a huge red envelope and a letter. This is a letter written by James. After the divorce, he was diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor told him that if he continued to be negative, he wouldn't live beyond 3 years. The doctor suggested he go abroad for treatment. In the letter, he mentioned that he chose not to go abroad because he wanted to see me happy. He no longer hopes to remarry me. Emma, after I go abroad for treatment, I won't be coming back. Even if I die, I don't want to go back. A place without you means nothing to me. I love you, Emma. Goodbye, Emma. 3 years later, I received a call from a lawyer abroad. The lawyer told me, James left me a substantial inheritance, and suggested that I go through the inheritance procedures. I handed the ice cream to my son, and said to the lawyer on the other end of the phone, I don't need this inheritance. Please help me donate it to a charity. I believe those poor children need it more than I do.